this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You know, over the last few years, it seems as though that Kevin Costner has popped onto both my news feed and my social media feed more than I'd care to remember. It's not that I necessarily have anything against him. It's just like super saturation, dude. He's everywhere. And don't get me wrong, I am a Kevin Costner fan. Probably out of all of his movies, my favorite one is Field of Dreams. It always gets me. That last scene, I think that those of us that may have longed to have had a father when we were growing up, and he meets up with his dad at the end, and he merely looks at him and says, "Hey, Dad, can we have a catch?" And inevitably, I cry. I cry every time I see that scene. But for us today on Body Bags, there are tears being shed right now in Iowa, and they're not fiction. They're real. They're real because found in a field were the remains of a 17-year-old girl who has been brutally murdered. To make it all the more horrific, her mother had gone out looking for her because she hadn't come home. That girl's name is Michelle Luna Jackson, and today we're going to talk about her homicide. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, as far as the eye can see around this area that I live in, up in the northern part of Calhoun County, Alabama, not Calhoun County, Iowa, where our case today takes place, not too dissimilar. Of course, the land rolls a bit more than it does in Iowa, but man, there are cornfields and cotton fields and alfalfa and all kind of other things that grow. It's a farming community, and that's really all there is up here. We have university, but you start to get away from the town that I live in Jacksonville, Alabama, and you come across farm after farm after farm. And how many of these little locations have you and I both driven through over the years? It'll be like a little crossroads, and it'll be called a town. It might have one stoplight or maybe a flashing yellow light if you're lucky, but you can look on a map and it's identified there. This location where this took place is, I don't know, it looks to be roughly 120 miles northwest of Des Moines. And, you get out there and people have described that area as just being like a sea of corn as far as the eye can see. And I don't know if that's the case here, but it kind of sounds like it.
A town of fewer than 400 people. And when we first started looking at this story in particular, something caught my attention, Joe, because oftentimes when we have a story that begins with somebody missing, immediately people do things that make no sense to me. But in this one, it is exactly what I would do. When 17-year-old Luna doesn't come home, as expected, it's 11 o'clock on Sunday night, her mother picks up the phone and calls police. Now, in a town that size, she probably knew somebody to call directly, not going through 911.
Right.
And that's what, hey, Luna's not home. I don't know where she is. She took off on her scooter. She wasn't running away. We were expecting her right back, and please help. And so she makes the call. my daughter's missing. And then she grabs her other daughter and they go out looking. Now, they didn't hop in their car to go looking. They started walking because Luna left with her scooter. So they know, generally speaking, she's going to be in an area where she can be found by looking for her.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. Well, not exactly. I take that back. But they did, as they were walking, looking for Luna, they see a man riding Luna's scooter. Taking a closer look, they realize the man is covered in what appears to be blood. I don't know exactly what she felt in that moment, but my heart broke. The mom seeing her daughter's scooter and a man she doesn't know riding it, looking like he's covered in blood. Calls police, they get involved, and immediately the guy lawyers up. Before they can get any information, Joe, he says lawyer. We know his name, Nathaniel Bevers-McGivney. He's 21. But Nathaniel Bevers-McGivney lawyered up right away. We don't know of any relationship between the suspect and the victim here. We don't know anything yet. It's a new case. But that's where it sits right now, as the mom on that Sunday evening finds her daughter's scooter, the man in blood, and does not find her daughter.
I got to interject something here. I had you spurred some memories for me here, Dave. I think back. Not every case that you work is a body that is simply found. You know, some stranger in the public happens to walk along and they come across a body. And maybe the body's been there for a while. The individual is not, not part of the life's narrative of the deceased. But, Dave, those cases where families have been touched by death, and certainly the horror, and it can be even a perceived horror, just because Luna's mother saw the scooter that looked like her daughter's, and just because she saw a guy riding along on a scooter that appears to have been covered in blood doesn't necessarily mean the two things are related. However, when you begin to look mathematically at the odds, and we've talked about how isolated this place is, how small of a location it is, what are the odds that, first off, your daughter would be missing, and that you've got this guy who just, I got to tell you, just the images that I've seen of him, he looks big and powerful. He looks like what you would think a farm boy looks like, and he's got what appears to be blood on him, and it's in the evening. That's another thing. So if it's in the evening, you're under dim light. She sees what she thinks is blood. I don't know how close he passed to her, but you begin to think about this and you think, oh my word, it must have been a copious amount of blood to be able to make that recognition potentially in twilight time. There's a lot going on here. And Dave, I got to say one more thing here. This case is absolutely horrific. I hadn't heard anything about it. I didn't hear anything about it till my wife mentioned it to me, because she saw a 17-year-old, and that was the first thing for her. And any of you folks that have met Kimmy, my wife, you know how she is. I mean, she's like a bulldog with things many times, and you've seen her at Crime Con and these sorts of things. And this really struck a note with her that this is something that we needed to discuss. And it hasn't been picked up, broadly, I don't think, in the national discourse of true crime, but a horrific case. And what makes it really striking for those of us that live in small communities is that it actually happened in a very small community where you wouldn't think that something this horrific would go down, Dave.
No, and that's one of the safety nets we have in a small community. If you've lived in other areas, you know what it's like to be, in a city versus a small town environment. And they both have their pros and cons. In this particular case, as we mentioned, I was struck by the fact that mom did exactly what I would do.
Yeah.
I would take off looking. I know about where she's going to be. So boom, I'm going. And I want to point out that while she did see the suspect here with her daughter's scooter and other items of Luna's, not just the scooter, but other items as well.
Which they have not identified yet.
No,
but just that statement alone is chilling, Dave.
But there's no Luna, and they can't find her, and he's not telling. So we don't know what time exactly Mom saw Nathaniel Bevers-McGivney. We don't know what time that was. We just know that it was after 11 p.m. and before 9 a.m. the next morning. And we know that police took him into custody and talked to him, which he lawyered up. And so it wasn't until the next morning, remember, 11 p.m. on Sunday night, my daughter's not home. She's missing. Help me find her. And then the next morning, after sunrise, they, being officials, looking for Luna, find her. She's not out in the open. She had actually been hidden, Joe, put away in an area where you didn't see her immediately.
Yeah, that goes to, when you think about these sorts of things, they're talking about things. I think that one of the charges has to do with concealment of human remains. Well, they talk about, what was it, Dave? One of the charges is abuse of a corpse.
Abuse of a corpse. And I wondered what that meant, Joe.
Yeah. And, and that can come in a variety of different degrees. It's almost like passive versus active. Okay. Just think about it. If someone were to actively abuse a corpse, there's any number of ways that an individual can engage in that kind of behavior, and I think, one of the first things we think about is maybe dismemberment. Okay. But then you can kind of passively do it. And I don't know if you've given any thought to this, but that law in most places is written with families in mind. Okay. So let me just pose this to you. If you have a loved one that dies, any reasonable person would have an expectation that they would get those remains back and that they could view the remains, and that their family and friends, the extended family and friends, could view the remains, that you could have a wake for them perhaps. So if you kind of passively do this means that you obscure the body in some way. Well, what's going on? Well, you are allowing, through your actions, the body to become decomposed. And that in and of itself, in a roundabout way, you're facilitating, first off, almost a disfigurement of the body. And that's cruel. It's very cruel. And so I think that when these legislatures pass these laws like that, that's part of it. It's not merely about somebody that's a necrophile or somebody that's into dismemberment or burning a body. It can be that kind of passive action, when the family, unfortunately, I've had to deal with families over the years where they will ask me, and I'm no funeral director, but they will ask me, do you think you can have an open casket? And, and I'll phrase it like, look, I'm not a funeral director, but there's a high probability you would not want to subject yourself or your family or your friends to this because the body is so far gone. So we don't know if that is all that this entails relative to what was done with her body in the postmortem state. Was it this guy's intent to obscure her, and so therefore they thought about what's going to happen to the body afterwards, that no one is actually taking care of the dead, and it's going to lead to the family being absent that opportunity in her death. So there's a different way, to kind of look at that and think about that. It doesn't necessarily mean something more horrific that you could, I think many of us could go there in our minds simply based on stuff we covered on our podcast, Dave.
Never occurred to me, Jeff.
They felt like that they had grounds to charge him with this, Dave.
Never occurred to me. I just never thought of it like that. I really thought abuse of a corpse would be a dramatic, active, and yet that actually makes sense because the way we've mentioned, this is a fresh news story, and a lot of information has not been released or is not available yet because we're not far enough down line to get the actual police reports and search. They'll do search warrants and things like that as part of the investigation, but we don't have any of that right now. We just know that he specifically and on purpose put her body in a place where it was not easily found.
Yeah. And, right now at JSU, I'm teaching, actually this semester, I'm actually teaching a class called Clandestine Burials. And there's any number of ways that you can clandestinely bury or obscure a body. And it's not just you're burying a body necessarily, but you are obscuring the body. You're maybe placing a body in a body of water. I know that's rather redundant to say that, but there's any number of ways that this can take place. But here's the big thing. Was it his intent to obscure her body so that he could put as much distance between himself and the remains of Luna?
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Dave, one of the things, particularly when you're talking about a homicide, if someone were to say, well, which would you rather work? Would you rather work a homicide inside of a structure or out in the woods / open field? I'm with the structure all day long. I'm not saying that they're not complicated, because some of the most complex cases I've ever been involved in have occurred in a structure, but you have that containment. You know what I'm saying? You got the four walls. Wow. That sounds like an old country song, doesn't it? I think it actually was. You've got the four walls that are surrounding you, and things are protected, right? You got a roof over your head. Now, I've been in some structures that no longer had roofs, abandoned buildings and that sort of thing. But you understand what I'm saying? There's an area of containment that's kind of occurring, that the body is there. Man, you start to get out into rural areas where you've got a wooded area or an open field, and it just absolutely becomes a nightmare to process the scene.
I go back to this is from the actual documents, okay? The location, court documents. The location where the body was discovered suggests that Bevers-McGivney intentionally hid the body to conceal a crime. And then he failed to disclose where she was after they were talking to him. Think about it.
Yeah.
He's been seen by her mother, with the girl's scooter with what appears to be blood all over his body. And he's not telling anybody where the body is.
Yeah. The big word there is intent. Anytime you get the I word in there, that means that the police have knowledge. They have knowledge because, intent is very difficult to prove. It's one of those things that, because you can say, that you intended to do something or somebody else intended to do something. But if you're going to go into court with this element of intent, then that's kind of a higher bar, to kind of go across. So obviously they have specific information related to this, but I got to touch on something here, Dave. I want to go back just for a second. You talked about multiple scenes, and there can be multiple scenes. And this is kind of how we break them down in investigation. So you will have a primary scene. If you have a body, a decedent, obviously your primary scene is going to be where the body is found. And if I use the idea of a wagon wheel with a hub, the body is the hub, everything else kind of radiates out from there. And then you have secondary scenes, which might be say, for instance, a conveyance like a car, or maybe the initial location of where they were killed. That would be secondary. And then you have what are referred to as tertiary. I'll give you an example of tertiary. If you go back to the O.J. Simpson narrative that people put out, like after the homicides occurred out there, one of the things that people had talked about was that he was in a car headed to the airport. Remember, I think famously he was in Chicago when the alarm went up about this. And some people have stated that things were thrown out of the window of the limo as he's going down the road. That, if you came across those items, that would be like a tertiary scene. Okay, so that's kind of how it breaks down. But here's the interesting thing about Luna's case for me is that he's on her scooter. So if this guy has means, Dave, why would a 21-year-old man, he looks like he's been, living off of steaks and corn his entire life, big fella, why is a 21-year-old man riding up and down the road on a scooter allegedly covered with what appears to be blood? Why? Because that's almost like a clown show to me. If you see some big guy riding down the road on a scooter, that's kind of odd to me. It's going to make me take notice. So, and out in the middle of what would be a very isolated area, again, you add that element to it. It's kind of a strange, if you can just for a moment envision this big guy tooling down the road on a scooter, where everybody else is driving what my son likes to call brodozers, which are the jacked up, big old trucks and that sort of thing going down the road. This would be an oddball, and no wonder it caught Mama's attention. I mean, just think about it. That's what she's witnessing this in real time. She sees what she believes is her daughter's scooter. There's a big fella on it, and he's covered with blood. So how did Luna wind up in this field? Was she killed somewhere else? Or let's just say someone may have been lying in wait for her, knowing that she rides her scooter along a roadway. Periodically, she's known to do this. If somebody's watching, it's a crime of opportunity. This doesn't sound like something necessarily, Dave, that's very well planned out. The other thing to this, the other part to this that is very disturbing, I think, they have referred to these items of Luna's that this fellow was supposedly in possession of. So, when I hear items that belong to the dead, the first thing my mind goes to are trophies. Now, is that what's going on here, or is there an attempt to try at some kind of rudimentary level to obscure not only her body, but also who Luna was?
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
So, Dave, I've got to begin to try to understand, in order to fully assess this case from a forensics perspective, just so that I understand where we are here. The accused immediately lawyered up. He's not like some font of information that's saying, oh, yeah, I saw her. That's the reason I was on scooter. And, yeah, she disappeared out into the cornfield, like Field of Dreams. That's not what's going on here, is it?
No, and the criminal complaint alleges that the location where the girl's body was discovered, quote, suggests that Bevers-McGivney intentionally hid the body to conceal a crime, and that he failed to disclose the location with intent to conceal a crime. That's the different charges that come into play. But when they find the body, you mentioned a minute ago about the different types of the scenes: primary scene, secondary scene, tertiary scene. When you're doing that, do you start at the primary scene and go out in the investigation?
Well, you can't say that affirmatively, like that's what is going to happen, because many times you'll find the secondary or even the tertiary scene before you ever find the primary scene where the body
and it
is.
leads you to it then.
And it leads you to it, yeah. And so if you're talking about someone that has been killed, and I'll go ahead and make this big reveal here, and we can come back to it, but we do know from the statements that have been made is that Luna's throat has been cut. Mm-hmm. And so when we begin to think about throats being cut, Dave, you're going to have far more evidence most of the time than you will even with gunshot wounds, because the cutting of the throat, and depending upon how deep and how extensive it is, you're going to have a tremendous amount of bleeding that will take place. So you could, let's just say that she was attacked on the roadway and her throat was cut there, where you could have a blood trail leading literally from the shoulder of the road back into the field, assuming that it took place there. And since he's not driving a car, the accused is not driving a car, I have to assume that the homicide more than likely took place approximating that field, unless there's some kind of abandoned vehicle somewhere that they haven't let on to at this point in time. And if that's the case, a vehicle would be super saturated with blood. So you're going to have, from an evidentiary standpoint, how do you track the body? Well, with a body that has been bled like this, with this insult to the throat or the neck, you could potentially have a trail. You could have pools of blood. And then she's in a field. Well, we have some clues here, because they're talking about that there has been an attempt to obscure the body. Well, if you're obscuring the body, that means most of the time, there's kind of different levels to this. Have you shown up with a shovel in hand and dug a hole in the ground? Maybe you've created a pressed area. It's not a 6-foot deep grave. It's a shallow grave. Or is it a surface disposal where you leave the body on the surface of the ground, and then and we don't know this for a fact. We know she's in a field. We know they grow a lot of corn there. Was the corn harvest taking place yet? Well, this time of year, at the time of this recording, we're in early October. This would have occurred at the end of September. I would probably say that if it hasn't taken place, it has at least started to take place at this point. So what are you going to have? Well, you'll have discarded corn stalks, perhaps, and other debris. Well, was her body placed out there, and then the corn stalks taken, or whatever items were out there, and placed on top of them? Were there downed limbs, for instance? And listen, there's one thing that Iowa doesn't necessarily have a lot of, and that's trees. And most of the time, if you have trees, they're going to be in towns, that have been planted by somebody. You're not going to have like old growth forest around there, because we're talking about, kind of the plains here. So what is the body being obscured with? How is the body being obscured? And how would the perpetrator know about this specific location, Dave? And what was it that they assessed this location to be, where they knew that there would be an opportunity to obscure a body? Why not move it somewhere else? Why not take it to a local creek bed or to a local quarry, or whatever the case might be? No, the body was placed in a field and left there. And these cases like this become a nightmare to try to process. And here's why. If we are to follow this line of logic, where Mama has seen the accused on her scooter and he's got blood on him, then let's just think about, well, if we're trying to track him to determine which location did he leave after he, how did he depart the field? Did he just leave the scooter on the side of the road after he attacked her and then went back and fetched the scooter? Was the scooter drugged back there with her? Did she take it back there with her? We don't really know. But if he left and she's deceased and her throat has been cut, Did he leave a blood trail leaving out? Also, he's a big guy. Are there foot impressions in this soft dirt? We're talking about a field, Dave. So is there an indication that he walked out of the field and then got back onto this roadway, which, you said mom and sister are on foot looking for her. This cannot be too far away from her domicile, where they live. It's got to be close in approximation. I was looking at some of the aerial photography of this place, and you've got this, you've literally got this little town that, by my estimation, has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Dave, it's got 6 north-south streets total for this little town. And if you break it down the grid, running east and west, there are through streets. You've only got like 5. Mm-hmm. And you know what else? In that little sea, that little oasis of the little neighborhoods, the town and everything else, it is completely surrounded by farms. It's striking when you look at this on a map, particularly a satellite view. You don't have this town would look like an oasis. If you're kind of driving across this area, it would just like pop up, and then it's just engulfed in farms as far as you can see. So wherever she was living, wherever the mom lived, it's within easy walking distance of any field around there. That's going to be key with this case.
Right, when the body is left in the field and they say, it was hidden, the body is hidden. With the alleged perpetrator covered in blood, and we know that she had her throat slit, the blood normally pools on the surface. And, when we're in a scene, and if it's in a house and the carpet or whatever, we got dirt in a field, grass, yes, dirt. You mentioned corn and other things, but will the blood then seep into the ground and become part? Does it make it harder to determine what happened when the body is placed in a field like this?
Not necessarily. It all depends. Well, with the unaided eye, what I say is the unaided eye. That means that I'm not using any kind of special lighting, photography. Heck, I'm not even using a magnifying lens at this point in time. I'm just eyeballing it. You can see a contrast in soil between the blood and the soil itself. You can get an appreciation of it. One of the things that's very important to do, as you can imagine from a forensic standpoint, is you need to take soil samples. And the beauty of a soil sample is that, unlike perhaps maybe some other surface like a hard concrete surface, you can begin to talk about saturation. How deep did this go? How deep? Because, just imagine, now you might not can give them the exact volume of it, but just imagine what kind of tool this is for a prosecuting attorney to say, she bled so much that our investigators at the scene dug down 1, 2, 3, 4 inches. They were still finding blood at that level. They took samples of the soil out there, core samples, where you just kind of, almost like you're generating a golf hole on a golf green, where you take out that plug like that and you can demonstrate how deep this thing went. And that's going to be telling. And I think, for me, what would be the motivation behind this? Because that brings in another level of physical evidence that could be left behind. And I think the most obvious thing here is this a sexual assault gone bad? Did he attack her, drag her out in the field, and sexually assault her? And I can promise you this, when Luna's body was examined by the forensic pathologist, they will have done a rape kit. Mm-hmm. And I don't even care if she's in a state, if her clothing is completely intact, because you have perpetrators that will redress bodies. Even after a sexual event has taken place, they'll redress bodies. So you cannot work on that assumption in the morgue that, nothing happened. The clothing wasn't disrupted. That's one of the worst decisions you could ever make, because once that evidence is gone, it's gone. So they will have done a rape kit, in this particular case. when we think about the accused here, Dave, we've talked about, kind of footprints and, and bloody trails and primary scene, secondary and tertiary. But here's one other tertiary element here, Dave. Where was he domiciled and what happened to his clothes? Because I got to tell you something, brother, his clothes would have been, I don't know if super saturated is going to be the wording that we're going to use, but he will probably have had some element of blood on that clothing. DNA alone with that, you have to be able to answer this question. How did Luna's biological signature wind up on this guy? Mm-hmm. And what, how was it is it blood? Is it skin? Is it hair? Well, if it's blood, how did her blood wind up on you? Now, he doesn't have to answer that question. Defense doesn't have to answer that question, but that's not the important thing. What you do is you put that question before the jury, because jury, 12 people, they're going to be sitting there saying, yeah, how did this young 17-year-old girl's blood wind up on his person, on his clothing? So they're going to have to search his domicile from stem to stern. I would imagine that they've done that, digging through anything that he had. I can't imagine that he just rolled into the house on her scooter and laid down in the bed in these dirty clothes. I can't imagine that. Maybe there was an attempt to clean up after the fact. I don't know. There's more to dig into here, Dave.
Yeah, Joe, one of the things that came out in looking up who the victim is in this case, with Luna, and trying to find out more about her, 17-year-old junior in high school. And one of the things that she loved to do was to swing, a swing set.
Yeah.
And it was so known. She would go to the park and just sit in the swing. It was just her thing to do. Everybody knew it. As a matter of fact, they're decorating one of the swings in the park in her honor.
If you think about just the idea of an observable location, where she would have been seen, she would have been known to maybe be alone. Maybe she went out on her scooter, went specifically to the park to sit on the swings. And if he has a point of observation in that location, he can target her at that point. But, there's a number of other places he could have seen her throughout this town where he had identified her. And here's one other question I would have relative to the person that's accused in this case, Dave. I want to know if there have been any other instances that could have linkage to him and inappropriate behavior with young ladies around the town. Was there anybody else that he had come across that, and sometimes, people will say, talk about feelings and those sorts of things about he gave me the creepy guy feeling or whatever it was. Well, that's one thing, but had he ever acted on anything? Because this is a big leap here. You don't have somebody that's exposing themselves or making a threatening comment, which I don't know, maybe he did at some point in time, but what we're seeing right now, no, this is a huge leap.
To start off with a murder.
Yeah. And very personal too, man. I mean, we're talking about the cutting of a throat here. That in and of itself is so incredibly intimate. So, for investigators, they're going to be digging into all of this. And again, I go back to his home. One of the things that's disturbing about this, again, is the fact that he took her items. I want to know what other items are in that home. Are there any other items that are related to someone else, perhaps, in that town? It wouldn't be hard to kind of whittle this down, if you will, and narrow down your field here. To kind of explore this a little bit to try to understand that. And, when it's all stitched together and everything, that's going to be of interest. But there's one more thing, I think, talking about creating a case that you had mentioned to me that I found kind of interesting. They initially did the prosecutor actually recuse themselves from this case?
When we were looking at this is something that popped up right away. And I asked you, is this common? I mean, we're in a very small area where a lot of people know, you tend to, it's like you're living at Cheers. Everybody knows your name kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they filed court documents on Monday. I mean, we're talking about the day of. finding her body. Okay, Sunday night, 11 o'clock, she's reported missing. They find her body the next morning, 9 a.m., and they're filing paperwork because they already have the suspect in custody. He's already lawyered up. And they filed court papers where Smith, the town prosecutor, it's Calhoun County, Iowa,
Right.
where he recuses himself from the case, and it's given over to the state, and the quote is due to a conflict of interest. However, that sat there from Monday until Thursday, and you're going, conflict of interest? What the, But on Thursday, they amended the statement rather, saying that it was in error. What it was instead of giving the case over to the Attorney General's office, Smith asked for the state to assist in the prosecution. It was an error in filing. So it wasn't a conflict of interest, although I'm thinking this is like the hindsight being 2020. I think immediately went, we all know each other. We got to pull in the state for this, cover ourselves. Look, man, no matter how bad you think of anyone in law enforcement or prosecutorial stuff, ultimately, the honest ones just want the truth.
Yeah, you want more eyes on you than not.
Yep.
When you're doing something like this, and this case in a town this size, a county this size, I think you have to think that this is probably one of the most ghastly things that's ever occurred. This is something that's going to stay with this community for a long, long time. Right. And I'm sure the prosecutor sounds like they're very thoughtful about this. Yep. I would imagine that they would probably welcome having maybe even riding second. People don't know this about attorneys. They talk about first chair and second chair, and that's a real thing. When you see them like at a table, like prosecution's table, and you see defense table, if you're first chair, if you're seated closest to the aisle first, that means first chair. That means that you're the lead on the case, and you have second chair, and that's how they're lined up. If people have ever wondered about that, so that means that the county prosecutor might want to ride second chair on it and have the state AG come in and send one of their prosecutors from Des Moines or wherever it is that would come in and kind of take the lead on it, but with the county still having their hand on the wheel. And again, the population is so small. I hate to keep, kind of going down this road, but it's an interesting piece to this case because the population is so very small and you don't have a big pool to draw from. These people know one another, man.
Right.
It's not, it's not like you haven't run across them at some point in time. And so I think that the prosecutor probably wants to avoid any kind of appearance of wrongdoing here on any level. I got to say, we were talking just a moment ago. You had mentioned that Luna was a junior in high school. Well, she's a junior in high school, Dave. Just, you can only imagine her class, her overall class size is very small. Just the impact that it's going to have on those kids that occupied her space. Maybe that same space has been occupied by the same group of people since they were all in kindergarten. That happens in these small communities like this. This is something that will resonate for years and years, to come, long after the last switch is flipped in the courthouse and the lights go dim. This will continue in their memory. Every time you drive by that field, they'll say, "Yeah, that's where they found Luna," or "Yeah, that's where Luna lived," or "That's where the perpetrator lived." More to come on this case, and we're going to keep an eye out because, again, it's quite shocking. It's quite shocking to the people in Calhoun County, Iowa, and we'll wait for more information to come. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.